Brown v. Board of Education was a court case in 1954 that banned segregation in schools. The freedom of the slaves during the Civil War did not eliminate all racial prejudice. In fact, discrimination continued throughout our country for many years until it was made legal by the Plessy v. Ferguson case that ruled that black and white facilities may be separate but equal. However, the equal part of this deal was often ignored, which was a major problem when it came to schooling. African American children were not provided with the facilities or resources they needed to succeed in school. This map shows the extent of segregation in schools before the Brown v. Board of Education court case, where the red represents states in which it was required to have segregation, yellow represents states where it was not legislated, blue represents states where it was optional, and only green represents states where segregation was forbidden. 13 parents of African American students in Topeka, Kansas wanted to end the injustices their children were facing. Among these parents was Oliver Brown, whose daughter Linda had to walk 6 blocks to get to her bus stop, which brought her to her school a mile away. Even though the school in this town for white children was only 7 blocks away from Linda's house. Oliver Brown and the other parents enrolled their children in this white school, but were refused. The parents took this to court and became plaintiffs in the Brown v. Board of Education court case. The court ruled in the favor of these 13 parents and concluded that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place, therefore overruling the Plessy v. Ferguson court case. Unfortunately, this did not end all discrimination. There are many people who did not agree with the desegregation of schools. Even 10 years after the Brown v. Board of Education case, only 1% of black children in the South attended desegregated schools. In the country, there are many more court cases and protests such as this in order to end segregation in schools, though not all of them were as successful. However, after the Brown v. Board of Education case, most schools in the South were legally desegregated. Brown v. Board of Education decision impacted the country socially because it fueled many more protests about discrimination and segregation and eventually led to the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. The Brown v. Board of Education court case caused more attention to be put on the suffering endured by African Americans. This led to things such as the protests of Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King's peaceful protests that greatly changed our nation, and the African Americans' fight for the right to vote. Our country has come a long way since 1954. Schools have been affected the least. Most schools still have a lot of racial segregation, mostly due to the racial segregation in the neighborhoods in which these students live. Despite this, the learning rates for African American children have soared past what they used to be. The first Board of Education also affected our nation politically. Due to protests stemming from this court case, African Americans have won more government involvement and rights, including the right to vote. The fact that our country elected our first black president in 2008 may be a direct effect from this court case in 1954. Our country has changed a lot economically because with a better education, African Americans could get better jobs. With the higher incomes African American families were receiving, the economy was no longer solely based on white men. In conclusion, our country has come such a long way from what it once was, a nation filled with discrimination and segregation. Much of this is due to the 13 parents who wanted their children to have a better education. There is unquestionably still discrimination in our country. We have taken great strides in making sure that everyone is treated equally.